Hi, this is the Unwilling Pawn. I'm continuing with my War in Afghanistan series, which is part of the 9/11 conspiracy theory series. Um, an essential part. I'm continuing. I think I did the drugs, oil and gas drugs, those two main sections. Obviously, the videos associated with those. I think there's a total of 4 videos. And the mineral wealth of Afghanistan earlier. So, but I think 5 videos. I'm not sure. This section, yeah, 5 so far. And now I'm moving on to a section I'm calling Western Hegemony. Now, see, we went and discussed the main incentives for why the U.S. was in Afghanistan, in mineral wealth of Afghanistan, oil and gas, drugs, the opium, heroin. But there are obviously many other factors. They're not exactly material incentives, but Western hegemony is very important. Obviously, there are geopolitical factors that have to be considered, and so we're going to get into that now. We're dealing with one of the main strategists of the entire Cold War period, and definitely the biggest pusher for for countering the Soviet Union at every turn, making sure to rival them and to eventually destroy them and become the sole superpower. And that person's name was Zbigniew Brzezinski. I'm gonna get into his information. Start with that, but basically, I'm calling this section Western Hegemony, and let's just get right into it. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Eurasia, and the Grand Chessboard. Zbigniew Brzezinski, born 28th March 1928, and died recently. Well, I guess it's 5 years ago, 26 May 2017, was a Polish-born immigrant to the United States. Now, Poland is a former Soviet Union state that did not gain independence until the dissolution of that empire. Relations between Russia and Poland have always been rocky due to religious, political, ideological, and ethnic differences. Zbigniew Brzezinski had a disdain for Russia and was a die-hard Orientalist who believed that the West, led by the U.S., must remain the sole uncontested supreme superpower of the world, eventually becoming the only country in a one-world government ruled by corporations, basically. He graduated from Harvard with a PhD in 1953 and was a part of the faculty there for many years, mostly teaching politics and international relations. Brzezinski has one of the most impressive resumes for anyone working in politics. Some of his key roles include counselor, Center for Strategic and International Studies, professor of American Foreign Policies at Johns Hopkins University, National Security Advisor to former President Jimmy Carter between 1977 and 1981, trustee and founder of the Trilateral Commission, members of the Board of Directors and the Council on Foreign Relations, member of the National Security Council Defense Department Commission on Integrated Long-Term Strategy under former President Ronald Reagan, member of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board under Reagan, the 1988 co-chairman of former President George Herbert Walker Bush's National Security Advisory Task Force, and international advisor to several major U.S. and global corporations. So, that's one of those most impressive resumes there is. I mean, the only one in their caliber is someone like, let's say, Henry Kissinger. So these are those genius strategists. I'm sure they call them counsel or advisors, whatever. But basically, these are those. In the past, you had the king, and you had his chief strategist, and this is basically what this is. These are those strategists. These are the kind of people who king makers themselves or king manipulators. These are the kind of people who provide all of the information. If a king wants to conquer an area, they'll give him all the options. Well, you can exterminate the populace. Well, you can enslave the population, or we can do a peace treaty. They'll give you all the pros and cons of all of this. So he's one of those genius strategists. If you look at Chinese history during the Three Kingdoms period, you can see there was Zhuge Liang for the Shu side, who advised Liu Bei. So I mean, these kinds of genius strategists working under their kings. And Zbigniew Brzezinski was one of those people who were that influential. He's high up on there, advising many presidents and big corporations, and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. These groups play a big part and have big name members in them, including the likes of him and Henry Kissinger and many others. Zbigniew Brzezinski is the author of The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperatives, a 1997 book that sets out what the U.S.'s geopolitical strategy should be, namely that the landmass that he calls Eurasia should be the focus of all U.S. interests in order to undermine Russian and Chinese influence over Eurasia and, by proxy, much of the world. Eurasia is essentially all countries east of Germany and Africa, but not as far as Oceania or the Americas. Encompassing such a large percentage of the world's population, natural resources, and geopolitical interests, Brzezinski felt that control over this region would result in securing Western hegemony for centuries to come and fulfilling his dream of a one-world government ruled by U.S. and essentially corporations. His book is filled with elitist and imperialist overtones. If you have time, I suggest you read it or just listen to Mike Rupert. I gave you his link before. Mike Rupert expresses disgust and anger at Brzezinski's mindset. But he reads many passages. I'm going to read a couple that are relevant, in my opinion, to this war on terrorism. And you know, so I'm just giving you this background of Western hegemony. Key to his strategies, which he had been working on in his official advisor capacities, culminating into his literary work, was Central Asia, the Stans, including Afghanistan. The point is, he wrote this book in 1997. Obviously, these books aren't written overnight. The planning, concepts, they take time to develop in any author's mind. And especially when a book at this level, this geopolitical strategy level, and at the level of intelligence that we're dealing with, you could say this kind of book was 20 years in the making, 30 years in the making. But in his book, he emphasized Kazakhstan for its anticipated large reserves of oil and Uzbekistan for its fierce nationalism, hoping to undermine Soviet influence. Now, I mentioned this before. Some of these Central Asian states, like let's say oil and gas, sure, Kazakhstan had oil, but not as much as Brzezinski thought there was going to be. But they do have oil. Turkmenistan does have natural gas, one of the largest reserves in the world. But the point was not only for the oil and gas, it was to undermine, especially the Soviets, they had ruled over these areas. This was a part of the USSR, many of these Central Asian states, like all of these stans, minus Afghanistan. They were trying to annex Afghanistan, and that's where the line was crossed, and the Soviet empire crumbled. But they had control over these states in the past, and when they wanted to obviously control over Afghanistan as well. The whole idea was to undermine, to get nationalism. Obviously, trying to break up the Soviet Union, you need to go to each state and try to spread nationalism, or find the place that is most independent or seeking independence. Find out what they want, and try to get them to break away from the Soviet Union. He was one of those from Poland, and you could feel this anti-Russian resentment that he had in his heart, his whole life. You could see it through his actions, at least. For him, everything was about anti-Russia. Destroy Russia, and we'll be okay. We're set. And of course, undermine China as well. And of course, U.S. Who are U.S.'s main rivals to this very day? U.S., Russia, and China. The U.S. had been training troops in Uzbekistan for 5 years prior to 9/11, in line with Brzezinski's strategies. He was a chief advisor for America during the Cold War, bringing about the fall of the Soviet Union. While the Soviets chose the battleground in Afghanistan, America was not slow to respond, and other stans were on the agenda too. Brzezinski felt that they could be persuaded to seek independence or otherwise rebel, falling into the grasp of America and the West. He was key in training, supplying, and inspiring the Afghani Mujahideen, forces to fight against the Soviets. Recall that at this time the Soviets invaded Afghanistan on 24th December 1979. Brzezinski was working as the National Security Advisor for the then President Jimmy Carter. Check this video out of Brzezinski inspiring the Mujahideen fighters and expressing his hatred for the Russians. And I've given that link I don't usually give it in my description. I give you the link in my description. I'll give the link to my blog, and you'll find it in the blog. So there's a link to the video is called Zbigniew Brzezinski to the Mujahideen. Your cause is right, and God is on your side. Now, when you hear his hatred, you hear what he says. You also hear at the end Brzezinski saying that the goal was to make the Soviets bleed, and the West did just that. Again and again, I mentioned, this is not something that I'm just reading into that doesn't exist. Brzezinski hated the Soviets, and he felt destroying the Soviet Union was one of America's top goals. Thanks to Goldman Sachs, the Harvard Endowment, the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and the World Bank, the U.S. looted $300 billion out of the Russian economy. Russia's population was around 164 million at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. It is now near 145 million. In an age where populations are out of control everywhere else in the world, booming all over the world, only in places like Russia is it, you could say, down. I mean, 145 million is not low, but it's low for our times. And considering the fact that the population is just increasing out of control all over the world, except in Russia. For the type of landmass that Russia is, technically Russia has the largest landmass of any country in the world, if you include the Siberian part, which is basically ice-cold part. But considering that, and its landmass, only 145 million people living there, even for that time, was low. For now, obviously, it's much lower than it should be compared to other countries, relatively speaking. This was obviously due to starvation and war and the failure of Russian leadership, but most of all, Western cruelty. Zbigniew Brzezinski had a personal vendetta against the Soviet Union due to his Polish roots, and he used the Mujahideen to exact his vengeance. And that's my personal opinion. You can agree or disagree. Now, for some quotes directly from Brzezinski, written in his 1997 book. Remember, this is from 1997. And again, these ideas and concepts, they existed long before 1997. It was published in 1997. The Grand Chessboard, which I got from Michael Rupert's documentary video. You can get the book directly and see these quotes as well. Brzezinski states that with the fall of the Soviet Union, for the first time in recorded history, a non-Eurasian power has become the supreme power on the earth and the world's first superpower. He stresses that the U.S. must not allow Russia or China to ever take control over Eurasia, that it is the key to global domination. He believed that if America doesn't get and maintain control over Eurasia and the world, then the world will be miserable at the hands of tyrants and dictators. And you hear this mindset in the military-industrial complex all the time. That, if it's not us, it's going to be Putin. It's going to be Kim Jong-un. It's going to be this guy. It's going to be that guy. There's going to be dictators, and they're going to take over, and it is our duty to conquer the world, to save everyone from tyrants. Then we get into his analysis of why Eurasia is so crucial and the role of the Central Asian states. Begin quote. The attitude of the American public toward the external projection of American power has been much more ambivalent. The public supported America's engagement in World War II largely because of the shock effect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. End quote. After discussing the importance of Eurasia, that it contains 3/4 of the world's known energy sources, that it is home to most of the world's physical health, that it hosts physical wealth, that it hosts 75% of the world's population, and that it accounts for 60% of the world's gross national product. He explains 2 basic steps are thus required. First, to identify the geostrategically dynamic Eurasian states that have the power to cause a potentially important shift in the international distribution of power, and to decipher the central external goals of their respective political elites and the likely consequences of their seeking to attain them. Second, to formulate specific U.S. policies to offset, co-opt, and or control the above. Note that he doesn't care about what the people want, just how to buy and manipulate their elites, how to get control over these countries, how to manipulate them for America's benefits or for the West's agenda, West's interest in the region. He goes on, to put it in a terminology that harkens back to the more brutal age of ancient empires. The 3 grand imperatives of imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependency among the vassals, to keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep barbarians from coming together. So basically the mindset of the conqueror. He's talking about how do we conquer the Central Asian states? How do we keep the tributaries pliant? So if we have a tributary like Afghanistan becomes our tributary, or the other Central Asian states that become our tributaries, how do we keep them in line? How do we keep them protected as well? Promise them protection. Be a good master. But also, keep them in line. Keep them paying their tribute. And, keep them loyal to us. Maintain security dependency. Keep the vassals dependent upon us. Prevent them from colluding with each other, forming some alliance and breaking up or, being disloyal to us and not relying upon us anymore. And to keep the barbarians from coming together. So the masses, the regular people, who gives a damn what they want. All we care about is how to keep them under control and keep their elites and buy their elites and take over their countries. He mentioned something at the beginning. The way he's working through this is he starts out talking about, okay, Americans, how do we manipulate public opinion? I was going to get more into that. He kind of skipped over to that, and he started talking about Eurasia, why it's so important, and get back into manipulating public opinion, what we need to do. So here's what we need to do, and here's how we need to manipulate public opinion. So he mentions this. This is kind of disconnected a little bit. But he mentions the attitude of the American public toward the external projection of American power has been much more ambivalent. Normally, Americans don't want war, but you give them a good reason, they'll be ready for war. So public supported America's engagement in World War II largely because of the shock effect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories about how FDR made that happen. Put that to the side for now. That's a whole separate subject matter. I can't get into that. I'm focusing on 9/11. Conspiracy theory of 9/11 only. And it's not that I deny that, but I just don't want to get into it. I haven't gotten to the evidence in myself, so I can't evaluate how accurate. But the point is, that was something he mentioned. The mindset, the concept. How do we get the American public to support our war? Well, looking back to, hey, this worked back in World War II. Americans were only ready to get into World War II when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened. Okay, so get into the importance of Eurasia. How to keep how to conquer. How do we conquer that area? And then we're going to come back to it. Moreover, and this is continuing his quote, moreover, they, the Central Asian republics, are of importance from the standpoint of security and historical ambitions to at least three of their most immediate and more powerful neighbors, namely Russia, Turkey, and Iran. With China also signaling an increasing political interest in the region. I mentioned earlier that, the oil and natural gas, the natural trading partners are, to this very day, Russia, Turkey, and China for the Central Asian states. So they have, obviously, there's Uzbekistan, I believe. Uzbekistan, is it? No, it's Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, farthest north, has, I think, about 20% Russian population. So they have their natural links to these countries because of proximity, borders, culture, history, in some cases religion, other cases, and obviously resources, natural trading partners, all of that stuff. So they have they're more powerful neighbors, immediate neighbors. Their historical ambitions, he's saying we need to focus on them. Russia, Turkey, and Iran, and China, what they want. They're interested in the Balkans, Eurasian Balkans. But the Eurasian Balkans, and he continues, but the Eurasian Balkans are infinitely more important as an economic prize. And he talks about gold, mineral wealth, and oil and gas, much of what we have already discussed. He further states, without sustained, again, his quote, without sustained and directed American involvement, before long, the forces of global disorder could come to dominate the world scene. Again, if we're not in charge, there's going to be mass chaos everywhere, because no one ever ruled the world before us. It's either us or endless chaos and disorder. We are needed. It's the imperialist mindset, obviously. I need to be there. I need to be ruling everywhere. And the possibility, again, he continues, and the possibility of such a fragmentation is inherent in the geopolitical tensions not only of today's Eurasia, but of the world more generally. The most immediate task is to make certain that no state or combination of states gains the capacity to expel the United States from Eurasia, or even to diminish significantly its decisive arbitration role. In the long run, global politics are bound to become increasingly uncongenial to the concentration of hegemonic powers in the hands of a single state. Hence, America is not only the first, as well as the only, truly global superpower, but is also likely to be the very last. End quote. The idea basically is, if we can prevent, because of the way the world is heading to, the world is against conquest now. It's not cool like it was back in the day, back in many centuries before in human history, throughout human history. It was celebrated conquest. If your side won, that you were the victor, and conquest. But nowadays, people look down at conquest as if it's immoral or wrong. Even people of your own country. So Americans will look down at American conquest. Say, this is not for our time. Conquests are done. Everything's been conquered, and we need to just go into the business of living. So he's saying that because it's become so out of fashion to conquer, that if we can just prevent Russia and China from getting their hands on Eurasia or controlling Eurasia, then we'll be the only superpower left, and it'll be too impossible for other superpowers to arise, leaving us as the only superpower ever, the very last superpower. And then we come to the punchline that not only sets the tone for American policy in Afghanistan, but in fact gives us the mindset behind and the foundation of the war on terrorism itself. Quote, moreover, as America becomes an increasingly multicultural society, it may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues except in the circumstances of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. End quote. Enter Usama bin Laden. Obviously, that's one of the most, I wouldn't call that really foreshadowing. I mean, you have to look at, this was written, again, 1997, and the concepts had to be much older than that. He mentioned the attitude of the American public toward the external projection of American power has been much more ambivalent. The public supported America's engagement in World War II largely because of the shock effect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And then he finishes off with this. Moreover, as America becomes an increasingly multicultural society, it may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues, except in the circumstances of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. So just as America needed Japan to attack Pearl Harbor in order for Americans to get a consensus, because America is becoming too multicultural, how are we supposed to get Americans to get a consensus on foreign policy, to agree with us, to want to invade this country or invade that country? Well, we're going to need to get them to be afraid of something. Truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. And what is that threat? The threat of terrorism. This was before the whole 9/11. This was before terrorism has become the biggest threat of our time. Put it in plain words what their strategy was going to be. And then it becomes, talk about coincidence. Another one of those huge coincidences. The entire strategy laid out for you. And then you see that strategy unfold as we have been seeing that strategy unfold for the past 20 plus years. Talk about coincidence. And you compare this to World War II. He gave that example from his own book. This is how we got Americans into World War II. Now we need a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. The threat of terrorism. Enter Usama bin Laden. War on terrorism. Usama bin Laden. Sheikh Mohammed bin Aus bin Laden, Usama's father, moved from Yemen to Saudi Arabia in 1930. He formed the Bin Laden Company, which received contracts to maintain mosques, for the upkeep, maintenance of mosques, including the Prophet Muhammad's own mosque in Medina, the Kaaba and its surroundings in Mecca, and even Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem until around 1948, when the modern state of Israel was formed. His family developed good ties with the Saudi royal family and became super rich. The Saudi bin Laden Group, as it came to be known, became one of the world's largest construction companies, receiving contracts for not only maintaining mosques, but every other kind of project, of course. On the 10th of March, 1957, Usama bin Muhammad bin Aus bin Laden, that's, again, using his full name, Usama bin Muhammad bin Aus bin Laden, bin simply means son of. So, the first one was Sheikh Muhammad, his father, Sheikh Muhammad, son of Aus, son of Laden, that guy. Usama is obviously the son of Sheikh Muhammad, who was the son of Aus, who was the son of Laden. So bin simply means son of. Was born in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. It can be bin or it can be ibn, depends on basically Arabic grammar, what part of the sentence it's being used in, that sort of thing. He was born in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia in 1967. 10 years later, a few weeks after the start of the Arab-Israeli War, Sheikh Mohammed bin Aus bin Laden died, and Salim bin Laden, Osama's older brother, began looking after the family business and took care of his brother, who was only 10 at the time. And of course, being one of the 54 children, I forgot how many wives he had, but 54 children that Osama bin Laden had. Basically, that's how many brothers and half-brothers half-sisters he had. 53. So, being one of the 54 children of Muhammad bin Laden, Usama inherited his portion of his father's fortune in accordance with Islamic rules, inheritance rules. He enrolled in the King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah in 1973 amidst more Arab-Israeli conflicts, pursuing a business and administration degree. He later began working for the family business. The Saudi bin Laden group were heavy investors in technology stock like Nortel. They had a piece of Pepsi and Coca-Cola, and they had their hands in many other enterprises in real estate, aircraft services, and banking. In 1975, King Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, king from 1964 to 1975, was assassinated just 6 days after he met with the then U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, in which he stood firm on the Arab resolve against the state of Israel and embargoed the West, refusing basically to sell oil. As the Western economies were hit hard by the embargo, because that was done in 1973, and then he wasn't assassinated until 1975. As things were getting more and more desperate in the West, and the economies were being hit hard, going into recession as well, Henry Kissinger threatened, passed on obviously the Western Zionist threat to King Faisal, and he stated that we're going to bomb your oil fields if you don't, stop this embargo, because obviously they had no intention of giving in to his demands and stopping their support for Israel, because that would never happen. So they threatened instead to, be a tough guy and said, we're going to bomb your oil fields. He responded with his famous quote, famous line: "We and our ancestors survived on dates and milk, and we will return to them again." Basically, he was calling his bluff. He's saying, you're not going to bomb these oil fields. You need them a lot more than we do. We just started to modernize, and our economies are not really as dependent upon the modern technology and oil and everything else. Your economies are already completely dependent upon oil, and, we'll just go back to dates and milk if this modernization doesn't work out. So he called his bluff, and basically after this, the West was out of options. There was really nothing else but to get rid of him. Basically, King Faisal and them had... King Faisal was one of the first ones to open the door to the West. He was a king from 1964 to 1975 to open the door to the West and to do business and trade in oil and that sort of thing. But because of what Israel was doing, he was objecting to that morally by embargoing the West, because Israel was only able to do that with the support of the West. So he embargoed the West. I won't sell you oil, which the West desperately needed for his economy. King Faisal was respected not only by the Arabs, but by the whole of the Muslim world, even until this very day. It is widely believed amongst the Muslim world with conviction that his assassination at the hands of his own nephew, who obviously didn't want the Arabs to return to dates and milk, was thought to be the work of Henry Kissinger in the West, because their ego was hurt being dictated by uncivilized nomads, referring obviously to the oil embargo imposed by King Faisal in 1973. I've included a link here for more information on King Faisal. So where the alliance started. So obviously he was a prime minister and important minister and prince and in important political positions for more than 30 years, and then he over 20, 30 years, and so he was making trips to the West. It's, obviously, in these kinds of arrangements, Western leaders don't just meet with the king; they meet with the whole family, people who may one day be king, and in general have try to have good ties with all of them. And he always had good ties. He was a modernizer, liberalizer, that sort of thing, and everyone in the West liked him. And he's the one who started modernizing Arabia. But one thing he couldn't stand for, because he was pro-Palestinian, pro-Muslim, was the occupation of Palestine. by the state of Israel, and that's something he just couldn't stand for. And when the West insisted on supporting Israel at any cost, so he embargoed Israel, West oil, and that's where the bad blood started. And then he was assassinated just in 1975, so about 2 years after the oil embargo. Well, when he first issued the oil embargo, that he was against Israel. So in this video you can get the full background of what's going on with King Faisal, who he was, why he's so loved and respected, and many of the things that I mentioned. So these are just important dates. As Osama bin Laden was growing up, this was going on. Arab-Israeli conflict, Saudi Arabia, all of these things were happening during his lifetime. And without doubt, as it hurt the emotions of every Muslim, it would hurt his feelings as well. He would start beginning to get resentment or feel resentment against the West. In 1976, Salim bin Laden, Osama's older brother, hired James Reynolds Bath to handle all investments in the U.S. made by the bin Laden family. Jim Bath was a longtime friend of former President George W. Bush, Jr., and shortly after Salim hired him, Bath invested $50,000 into George W. Bush's first company, Arbusto Energy. In 1979, through the early 80s, Osama bin Laden went to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets, and he was fully supported by the CIA and the Saudi Secret Service. Now, there are countless different sources about, what he was doing or who he was supported by and how he came to this decision. Okay, I can't get into that. This is not a biography on Osama bin Laden. Okay, that's not the point of my paper. My paper is focused on the war in Afghanistan. And these videos are not focused on who Usama bin Laden was. Obviously, he was a player, an important player in the war in Afghanistan. And according to the United States, he was, or the CIA, the official story, lies you've been told, he was behind the attack. So therefore, he is an important part. Not as important as they would like you to believe. But he is a player in all of this. So understanding who he was and who his history was is important. How did he come to this? How did you get up and go to Afghanistan? Well, that's too lengthy. And not to mention, I don't have those sources, and who knows who has those sources now. The bin Laden family obviously was big at that time, and they were rich. And like I said, one of the largest construction companies in the world, and in fact, they worked in all of the Middle East. So UAE, if anyone has gone to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, prior to 9/11, you would see, their construction trucks. Their companies working on projects on the towers there, and many other projects throughout UAE. The point is that this I've given you this chronology here just to get an idea. Okay, this was going on. There was some important events, I think, that must have influenced Osama bin Laden. Probably many others. This is not by any means a complete list or a complete chronology of all the important events. But at the same time, all of this was going on because there were other, groups amongst the Arabs who were pro-Western. And, it was King Faisal's own nephew who assassinated him. It was by his hands that he was murdered. His own nephew, part of the royal family. So other people, obviously the West knew, okay, how do I don't like this King Faisal king. Who the hell is he? How dare he embargo the West and tell us not to support Israel? We're going to support Israel no matter what. So who the hell is this King Faisal? We got to do something about this guy. He's embargoed. He's not selling us oil. He's not playing ball. He needs to get the hell out. So let's find someone, his nephews and friends, get them greedy. You want to be the king? Just kill him. We need you to kill him. You want your Saudi Arabia to move forward in life and make money and enjoy all the benefits of modern civilization? Hey, just kill this king. He's talking about taking you back to the dates and milk. Don't you want to go to Europe and enjoy your life and drive Ferraris and everything, and many people do. You look at many of the Saudi princes. They're all over the place. They're in Europe, U.S., doing whatever the hell they want. You didn't have that before. You certainly have that now. And it started after this event, after killing King Faisal. Once he was assassinated and out of the way, it was a sign. It was a big event in Saudi history, Saudi Arabian history, that you had this new type of Arab who's willing to play ball. Because if he doesn't, he's just going to kill him. And the U.S. won't tolerate him being the king of Saudi Arabia. So we need you to play ball. Work for our interests. So that's bound to piss off a lot of people. Usama bin Laden was one of those people who was super pissed off. See, even in spite of the embargo, it was not that the U.S. was not getting a good deal. Oh yes, U.S., I believe it was FDR who negotiated that with, not King Faisal, in fact it was King Faisal's grandfather, I believe, who was the first king of Saud, King Abdulaziz Saud. It was him who, in fact, had the deal with FDR, I believe it was back in 1945, where basically the idea was, okay, give America access to Saudi oil reserves, first priority, and in return, U.S. would provide military protection for the family of Saud, for other families trying to remove them and take over power, take control over Arabia, and Iran also helped them with their local rivals. So it was their job to help them, and that was the deal basically. And also part of the deal was a commitment from Saudi Arabia to buy America's debt, to buy debt back. So yes, America paid for the oil, but also got Saudi Arabia to commit to buying debt. So, I mean, it was a hell of a deal for the U.S. It was already a killer deal. And in fact, it didn't benefit Arabia as much as it did the family of Saud. Okay, it was good enough for Arabia because at that time, Arabia wasn't selling oil to anyone. So this was something that opened up the market. But in order to open up the market, U.S. also got a hell of a deal for itself. But that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough for the West. That wasn't enough for Henry Kissinger of the West. So when King Faisal decided to embargo, well, the West just said, "Oh no, you will never stop supporting Israel," and started threatening, "We'll bomb your oil fields." So this leads to a lot of resentment. You get everything your way. You basically behave like a thug, and you get everything your way. And if our leaders don't play ball, you just kill them. Same time, you still have Usama bin Laden going to the United States, working with the Bush family. You still have connection between the Bush family and the bin Ladens and the Saudi royal family. Usama bin Laden was one of the... But we don't know the full story. Was he an agent? Was he an agent who went rogue and then turned on them? Was he working with them till the very end? Who knows? Who knows what the true full story was? Was he pissed off and waiting for his opportunity to turn on America? Whatever it was. I mean, it's very complex. I'm going to get into that analysis a little bit later. But I wanted to mention some of that now, that this is the point of this chronology here, that we're just getting into events that I thought were relevant to Usama bin Laden and this war in Afghanistan. It was in the late 90s that Usama bin Laden was suspected to be involved in the bombings of the USS Cole, and the American embassy bombings happened in 1998. The same year bin Laden was already added to the FBI's most wanted list, offering a $5 million reward for his capture, $5 million at that time. Now I'm going to repeat some timeline events, which will give better perspective. Something I mentioned, I believed, earlier during the drugs section and also in the oil and gas section. Between 1998 and 2000, former President George Herbert Walker Bush Sr. and former British Prime Minister John Major had meetings with the bin Laden family and the Saudi royal family on behalf of the Carlyle Group, one of the largest defense contractors in America. This according to the Wall Street Journal, 27 September 2001. In January 2001, the Bush administration ordered the FBI and intelligence agencies to back off on investigations involving the bin Laden family, including two of Usama bin Laden's family relatives, Abdullah and Omar, who were themselves living in Falls Church, Virginia, right next to CIA headquarters in Langley. This again from BBC Newsnight, correspondent Greg Pallas, 7th November 2001. On 13 February 2001, the United Press International, UPI, terrorism correspondent Richard Sale reported that the NSA broke bin Laden's encrypted communications, which proves that the U.S. would know if he were planning an attack and when such planning began. Between the 4th and 14th July 2001, Usama bin Laden received treatment for kidney disease at the American hospital in Dubai and met with a US CIA official who returned to CIA headquarters on the 15th July 2001. This is according to Le Figaro, French newspaper, 31st October 2001. It's the same Osama bin Laden who was behind the USS Cole and multiple American embassy bombings, and he was working with extremist Egyptian groups who used to blow up pyramid tourists. That's something that I heard from many other sources. This is not something I got from Michael Rupert, but it's something that I've heard from many different circles, Egyptian circles and others. In August 2001, the FBI arrested an Islamic militant linked to Osama bin Laden in Boston, who had on his person technical Boeing aircraft information and flight manuals. French intelligence confirmed his identity, and the FBI learned that he had been taking flying lessons. All just coincidences? Obviously they know the bin Laden family. Obviously they have links. Was Osama bin Laden a CIA asset? During his time in Afghanistan, his job was to recruit Mujahideen fighters, primarily from Central Asia, all of the Muslim states, and he did exactly that. Growing up in the midst of West versus Arab conflicts, he undoubtedly carried resentment in his heart for the West. He didn't want to see any American embassies or war bases on Muslim soil. He wanted revenge for Muslim lives lost in the Western wars against Muslim countries. He wanted Jerusalem to be returned to Muslim control. He was not alone in these sentiments. Now, I say he because really all of these are Muslim sentiments. Did he really have them? If he was a CIA stool from day one, then he didn't have any feelings or emotions. It was all made up, but we don't know that. Those who believe in him in the Muslim world to this very day, unfortunately, they don't believe that. They don't believe that angle. Say, no, he's deep-rooted Muslim. He was fighting for the Muslims. And there are others who have the exact opposite opinion. He was a CIA agent the whole time. He doesn't have any beliefs. And these are our Muslim sentiments, but they don't belong to him. He doesn't share them. He's with the Bushes. He's with them. He's not with us. He's with the Zionists. He was the ideal recruiter for the United States in its war against the Soviets. At that time, obviously, he wasn't infamous at this time. Not right away. I mean, he was infamous, but he certainly was in the right circles. He was the ideal recruit. Osama most likely did it for his own ambitions and America for its own. So this is my opinion. The U.S.'s intent was to make the Soviets bleed, as in the words of Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Osama's was to build his militant base. The mutual goal was to expel the Soviets from Afghanistan. So once the mutual goal was over, then everyone went their own way. Now what about the drugs? Now those who say, okay, hey, Osama bin Laden, he was a righteous, like let's say for amongst the Muslims, say, oh, he was a righteous servant of God. Well, what about all these drugs? When did Islam allow you to become a drug dealer, drug lord? Now what about the drugs? Is there evidence that Osama bin Laden, bin Aus bin Laden, Usama bin Muhammad bin Aus bin Laden was the supreme drug lord of Afghanistan. It is a well-known fact. Look at the chronology. Look at the timeline. It is a well-known fact that the heroin trade did not develop until Osama and the CIA got there. Coincidence? But you can't deny the timeline chronology. That's a fact. When did Osama bin Laden go to Afghanistan? In the late 70s, early 80s. That's exactly when you see the heroin production increase. And that's exactly when the CIA was there. When did the Soviets invade? In 1979. The timeline and chronology are undeniable. I showed you the bar graphs earlier about the opium trade. It started increasing at this time, 1979, 1980, 81, 82, etc. Undeniable timeline and chronology. Was he working for the CIA? The connections between the CIA, the Bush family, and the bin Laden family cannot be denied either. Obviously, the CIA and the West had an interest in recruiting Mujahideen fighters for the war against the Soviets. I mean, that way America could, deal a blow to the Soviets without actually having to send its own people. That's perfect. The Afghanis are the ones being attacked, and the Soviets initiated the engagement. Perfect. We don't have to send our troops. We'll supply them with weapons. They'll do the fighting. They'll be on the ground fighting for their country. We'll support them, encourage them. No problem. Pakistan will support them. We'll support Pakistan. But why would all of the Mujahideen groups, like Al-Qaeda, see Usama bin Laden as their leader? What was the reason he commanded that loyalty? Was it just his money, or was it complete support from the US? Can the proponents of Osama, those amongst the Muslim world who still see him as a martyr until this very day, really say he knew nothing about the drugs? Was he just recruiting these Mujahideen groups and they also knew nothing about the heroin? Was Osama and his holy warriors truly that religious? Isn't narcotics consumption and trafficking strictly forbidden in Islam? Is it logical to believe that the CIA, who has a long history of drug trafficking and money laundering through Wall Street, didn't have anything to do with setting up the heroin export from Afghanistan? Use your good sense. Obviously, the arms and drugs went hand in hand. Obviously, Osama and his recruits knew about the rising drug trade and used it to their advantage. Obviously, the CIA had everything to do with setting it up. Does that mean that Osama worked for the CIA? Maybe they were just using each other, for as long as they had mutual goals and both planning their next moves once the arrangement came to an end. Maybe Osama was first, in actual practice, a CIA asset and then went rogue. Maybe he thought himself clever, but was always America's useful tool. The truth is that we can't know for sure, as most of us weren't there, and those who were there only tell us the lies they need us to swallow. As I stated in my introduction video when I started this, the 9/11 conspiracy series, people interpret all of these political events in the way they want for their own objectives, based upon their own emotions, religious beliefs, their ethnic background, etc. The political agenda, whatever it is. We have to work our way out of that mindset to acknowledge that we won't be able to get an answer for every question. Some of this will always remain a mystery, but that doesn't, for the average person, obviously, for those who have the inside knowledge, they have the inside knowledge. Most of us will never know. It will remain a mystery. But that doesn't mean that we don't know anything. So we shouldn't just submit to the will of our overlords. So we shouldn't just submit to whatever CNN tells you or whatever the mainstream media tells you. They do nothing but tell you lies because they're run by people who have agendas. In short, we should not become willing pawns. It's clear that even though Osama was attacking the US and the CIA knew exactly where he was and could have killed him at any time, they didn't because they needed to use his persona to sell the Western public and the world on the threat of terrorism and why they should side with America. This is what Brzezinski was talking about. This was his whole idea. We need that threat of international terrorism, and Usama bin Laden's ugly face was there, everywhere. You couldn't escape his rotten effing face. You see his face everywhere. Usama. The US needed Usama's boogeyman image to sell the public on war after war. How many wars have they sold in the name of 9/11? How many times have they showed you his mugshot? How many? How many more will they sell you? How many more wars will they sell you? How many of us have fallen victim to their tactics at one point or another? You may have understood now. That's probably one of the reasons why you're even taking the time to listen to this video. Many others are not. They're still falling in the tactics. Oh yeah, I'm not one of those crazy conspiracy theory kooks. Okay. It's obviously working. And their evil tactics will work as long as we allow them to work. As long as we participate. Just go along, or too afraid to speak the truth. Usama or no Usama. We have to stop supporting their wars. Usama or no Usama. We have to fight against Zbigniew Brzezinski's clearly outlined tactics to unify the world against a perceived external threat, when we know that the real threat to us is from those presenting to us. In this case, the military-industrial complex. Usama or no Usama, we can't lose our own humanity. Usama or no Usama, we have to remember what it is we believe, what we live for, what we hope to achieve, what kind of world we want to live in, what kind of world we want to leave for our children, what we believe in, what are we about? Who the hell is Usama? Where did the hell he came from? He doesn't stand for us. He's not us. He was his own person. We are our own people. We have our own feelings, our own lives. Who the hell is he to dominate? Who is he to command us? And he didn't command us. They present to you Usama bin Muhammad bin Aus bin Laden did not command the loyalty of the entire Muslim world, but they present you. That's what they tell you. They tell you this false reality, as if he commanded the loyalty of the entire Muslim world. That's not true. He doesn't. As many are unfortunately brainwashed to believe. He wasn't that well known or respected in the Muslim world, as the enemy would have you believe. They would have you believe that all Muslims sip tea with Usama bin Laden, as if he was their frequent welcome guest, when it is more realistic that the bin Ladens were sipping champagne with the Bush family. It's unbelievable what people will believe. The truth is that the same people who have presented Usama bin Laden to you as the example of all that is evil are the same people who know him best and supported him. The truth is that most people in the Muslim world never knew who he was until he was paraded on every news channel. The truth is that most Muslims don't support him, and he is not important to them. He is all important to the founders of the war on terrorism. While the enemy doesn't want you to, you have to think beyond Usama. Brzezinski was an evil genius, but God has given you a brain too. Don't let him and other forces of evil win. One phrase can sum up the US's war on drugs and its war on terrorism. With the one hand, they send their arsonists to set everything ablaze, and with the other, they send their firefighters to put those same fires out. You have to stop listening to people who are the most devious and sinister of all of mankind. How can you rely upon these genocidal maniacs, these devious schemers, these methodical killers, for your sense of morality, for your information, for truth, for everything that you hold most dear? Why did you lose all good sense and submit to these people? Were you scared? Are you still scared? How did you let these people take over your country, your world, your own mind? Let them do the thinking for you. Let them tell you what you are. Let them tell you about realities that are not reality. Someone just has to show you a picture of Osama bin Laden and you're ready to forego all of your intellect, wisdom, judgment, everything. Search your own soul and consult yourself on how you allowed this to happen, how the devil tricked you, which of your weaknesses he used against you. And never let them trick you again. Never let them justify another conflict in the name of 9/11 or Usama bin Laden. Thank you for watching and listening mainly. I'm going to get more into topics related to Western hegemony, the Taliban, this whole history, get a little more of the background about the war in Afghanistan and what happened recently with the Taliban takeover, why it happened, get more into that, Afghani leadership and the connection to the White House, and the puppet governments, all of that stuff. Get more into that. And the justification for keeping this war going for 20 plus years, or pretty much around about exactly 20 years. So the justification for keeping this war going for 20 years, a 20-year-long war, and get more into that. And of course finish it off about the military-industrial complex, all the generals who got rich, super rich, the trillions of dollars spent on these wars, on all the Muslim wars, not just the war in Afghanistan. Get more into that in the next videos. Signing off for this one, of course, do like, share, subscribe, all of that stuff, and spread the awareness. Again, thank you for listening. This is the Unwilling Pawn signing off.